Alright, so in our last lesson, we learned how to multiply integers with chips. And remember that first number was for our groups, and the second number was for the chips. When we move to dividing, it actually is almost backwards. So we'll see what that looks like as we start working. We're going to begin with 15 positive counters. So I'm going to use my yellow positive chips to pull out 15 positive counters. And I'm even running out of room on my box. It gets crowded. When you have a lot of chips, it can get really crowded in there. So there's 10. 5 more. So once I've got these 15 positive counters, I'm going to be trying to make my number sentence. So it says I'm beginning with 15 positive counters, and then I'm making 5 groups. When we're making groups, that's a key word for dividing. So I'm going to start with a 15 divided by the 5. Both are positive. And now I'm going to show that in my picture on the left-hand box. I'm going to draw out the 15 circles I've already brought over. I'm just drawing my pictures right now. So I've got 15 yellow circles. They're running together, but we know that there's 15 there. So now in my next box, I'm actually going to be showing my work. So I've got those 15 yellow circles, and I'm going to be rewriting them. And this is exactly how you'll see it on the SOL. You will see all 15 chips in both boxes. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw groups and make groups up in my top square. So I'm going to pull over groups to make 5. There's 4 groups and there's 5 groups. So now I'm going to go ahead and make those circles on the right-hand square in my drawing. I've made 2 groups, 3, 4, and 5 groups. So now to figure out my solution, I'm trying to find out how many chips are in each one of those groups. And it looks like I've got 3 positive chips. So that means that 15 divided by 5 is a positive 3. Let's try one out where we're working with some negatives. So now I'm going to begin with 9 negative counters. Let me get rid of all of the stuff in my work paper. All right. There we go. All right, so it says to begin with 9 negative counters. So I'm going to go ahead and bring over 9 negatives into my workspace. Remember, we're using those red chips today to show the negative. And then it says that I'm going to be making 3 groups. So before I get there, I'm going to write out my number sentence. I started out with 9 red chips. That's a negative 9. And then I'm making groups, so I'm going to be dividing. I'm making 3 groups. That's a positive 3. So again, I'm going to write down what I've started with. I've got 9 red circles on the left. And now I'm going to actually be doing the work. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to redraw everything I've got. 9 red circles. Now we're doing the work. So we're going to be making those 3 groups. So I'm pulling over those 3 groups. 1 group, 2 groups, and 3 groups. So I'm going to draw that into my drawing, make my 3 groups, and now I'm looking at what do I have in each group. Well, I've got 3 red circles, so that actually means that I've got a negative 3. So negative 9 divided by 3 is equal to a negative 3. When I take 9 negative chips and I split them into 3 groups, there are 3 negatives in each group. All right, these are where it gets a little bit trickier. So if we have negative groups, so if the second number has a negative sign on it, we have to kind of look at it a little bit differently. We can't have negative groups, and the properties that we used in multiplication don't help because it only works for multiplication and addition, not division. So I'm going to pull out the negative, and I'm going to use it as an opposite. Remember that negative bar can also mean opposite, but when we talked about our properties. So let's see what this looks like. I've got 8 divided by -4 as my original problem. So when I rewrite it, I'm going to put an 8 divided by 4, and I'm going to put the whole problem in big parentheses with an opposite sign on the outside. Now I can solve what's on the inside here. So I'm going to go ahead and start out with 8 positive chips. Eight positive chips. And they do take up a little bit more space than what I necessarily have, but we'll work with it. So now I've got those 8 positive chips. I'm going to draw that in my picture. So I'm going to draw my 8 yellow circles. And now I'm going to, just like in the last examples, I'm going to redraw them on the right-hand square there. So I've got my 8 yellow circles. Before I can do any math, I got to draw what I've got. Now I'm going to be making what looks like 4 groups. So remember, I rewrote it so it's a positive 4. So I'm going to put them into 4 groups. There we go. So now I've got my 4 groups made, so I'm going to draw my circles in my work. Got to show all my work here. And now I'm looking for what my answer is, but I forgot to draw something. So I'm actually going to draw those big negative bars on the outside of both of my pictures. Those parentheses, and the negative sign is the opposite. So I'm looking at my answer. I've got to draw the opposite sign, that negative, my big parentheses, and I'm looking for how many are in each group. Well, I've got 2 yellow circles, so that means that I've got a positive 2. But I'm not done yet. I have to solve that. I'm looking for the opposite of 2, so my final answer, that quotient, is going to be a -2 for my final answer. All right, let's try another one. These are where it gets a little bit tricky. So let me clear out my workspace. Oh, got rid of my square. One moment, let me just get these together. I had a lot of work that I'm getting rid of. It's taken me a little while. Alright, so let me move this out of my workspace. Alright, back to my problem. So I've got a negative divided by a negative. So remember, that first number is for our chips, our first number is for our groups, and our second number is for our chips for division. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to rewrite it so that I don't have a negative in that second number. So I'm going to put the opposite sign on the outside of the parentheses. And the other number needs to stay the same. So that -6 is going to stay exactly the same. And I'm going to be dividing by a +3 this time around. So let's go ahead and move those chips onto my board. I start out with a -6. And I'm actually going to put them in, there we go. So I've got my 6 negative chips, and now I'm going to draw my pictures here. So I'm going to draw 6 red circles. And I'm not going to forget this time to put my giant parentheses around my box and the opposite sign. Let's go ahead and write that on the right as well. So I've got my 6 red circles and my giant parentheses and opposite sign. Just get that out of the way right away. So now I'm going to be putting them into 3 groups. So I'm going to use my big circle here to put 3 groups. Let me see if I can, there we go. So I'm going to get 3 groups. And it's nice because I already looked at my problem and made 3 rows. Alright, so I've got my 3 groups. I'm going to go ahead and circle them on my drawing to show my work, making those 3 groups. And now I'm ready to look for my answer. So I'm going to again put that opposite sign in the big parentheses before I can move forward. And I'm looking to see how many chips are in each one of those groups. So it looks like I've got 2 red chips. So that's going to be a -2. But I'm not done. I got to solve it. That's the opposite of -2, which actually ends up being a +2. So -6 divided by -3 ends up being a +2. All right, that's the end of our dividing integers with chips notes. So we're going to get a lot of time to practice them.